"She is not shackled, but he locked the door from the inside," whispered Titus, barely old enough to polish a scutum, his eyes wide and fixed on the general's private quarters. Smoke from the freshly lit lamps choked the tent flap. General Marcus Valerius had returned from the Dacian campaign not with victory screams but with silence, and the woman. She was Vistula, the enemy chieftain's daughter captured for display. Yet the usual guards were gone. Instead, 2 loyal praetorians stood rigid, facing the camp, their backs to the tent door. They were guarding the camp from the general, not the general from the captive. The arrangement was impossible. They knew the moment the sun rose, Rome would demand an accounting for the missing hostage. General Marcus Valerius stood overlooking the temporary encampment, the damp, cold morning air of the Danube frontier biting at the bronze plates of his breastplate. He was not a man built for comfort, his features sharp and etched by 3 decades of command. His silhouette against the weak dawn was the embodiment of Roman authority, powerful, unyielding, and absolutely solitary. His routine was the clockwork that drove the 16th Legion. Every dawn he tasted the rations, inspected the latrines, reviewed the casualty lists, and dictated dispatches that would shape the opinion of the Senate back in Rome. Today, the dispatch covered the successful suppression of the troublesome Dacian tribes. Success was the only currency accepted by the empire. He gripped the hilt of his short sword, the steel cold even through his glove. His prefect, Lucius, a man whose loyalty was matched only by his ambition, approached cautiously. "The scouts report activity, General. Small raiding parties, likely scavenging. No immediate threat." "Scavenging, Lucius?" Valerius' voice was low, resonating with the trained calmness of a commander who had seen legions panic and restored order with a single word. "They are testing the depth of our victory. They are counting the bodies we left behind, calculating the cost, and calculating when we will bleed again." He dismissed Lucius with a flick of his wrist. His public image was flawless. He was the vir triumphalis, the man who brought the spoils and the peace. Yet within the confines of his own mind, the victory was a hollow shell. Rome celebrated the capture of the chieftain's daughter, Vistula, seeing her as the ultimate symbol of Dacian submission. Valerius saw something else when he looked at her, a mirror to a wound that never closed. 20 years ago, during the Germanic campaigns, Valerius's own daughter, Livia, was taken during a swift, brutal raid while traveling to meet him at a safer outpost. The empire had offered condolences, paid respects, and moved on. The official report stated she had lost her life resisting capture. Valerius had ordered the outpost rebuilt and the region pacified, but he never found her body. Nor did he ever forgive himself for prioritizing duty over the safety of his family. The guilt was a heavy iron helmet he wore beneath the bronze. Now Vistula, the captured chieftain's daughter, sat within his tent, guarded not against escape, but against interference from his own men or worse, the state. She was alive, defiant, and whole. Valerius found himself avoiding her presence, yet unable to send her to the capital as ordered. To send her to Rome was to sentence her to a slow, ceremonial degradation, the fate he knew Livia would have suffered had she lived long enough to be found. Valerius was the instrument of Rome's absolute power, the perfect general, but inside he was just a father mourning a ghost. He looked out at the legions moving in practiced synchronization, an overwhelming machine of death and control, and in the heart of that machine, a single foreign girl had become the central fault line of his existence. He felt a desperate urge to protect her, an urge that contradicted every oath he had ever sworn. It was a weakness he could not afford, yet could not discard. The war was over, but the true battle was just beginning, confined to the 20 square feet of his tent. Gnaeus was a clerk, a man of parchment and stylus, utterly invisible in the grand theatre of the legion. He held the rank of escriba, tasked with maintaining the endless dry lists of supplies, personnel transfers, and most recently the inventory of captured goods and prisoners of war. He was thin, perpetually hunched over, his fingers stained with ink, not blood. His life was defined by the scratch of the reed pen and the constant fear of misplaced inventory. He was exhausted. The pace of the Dacian campaign had pushed his clerical staff past breaking point, and Gnaeus felt every missed sleep in his aching neck. His limitations were physical and social. He was weak in the way all intellectuals were weak in a military environment, easily intimidated by the brute force that surrounded him. His armor was a simple tunic, his weapon a sharp pencil. He protected only one thing of value, his younger brother, Cato, who had been conscripted into the auxiliaries against Gnaeus's desperate pleas. Cato was stationed miles away, but Gnaeus used every political maneuver his meager salary could afford to ensure the supply lines to Cato's unit remained reliable, sometimes forging requests for better quality grain or warmer cloaks. Today, Gnaeus was reconciling the list of high-value captives before their mandated transfer to the provincial capital. He sat in a small, cramped auxiliary tent, the air thick with the smell of stale wine and fear. The primary asset was Vistula, daughter of the recently defeated chieftain. Her entry was clear: female captive, Vistula, designated for senatorial display, status, secured under General Valerius's immediate custody. Gnaeus checked the manifest twice, then 3 times. The accompanying notes were standard: 2 Praetorian guards assigned. Rations accounted for, medical inspection noted. But then, Gnaeus pulled the supplementary log, the daily handwritten notes submitted by the centurions overseeing the immediate area. This log wasn't for official consumption. It was raw data. On the entries for the last 3 days, the details were unsettling. Day 1. Praetorians stand facing camp, door locked from inside. Day 2. General Valerius seen dismissing standard patrol rotation at sunset, delivery of specialized provisions, fine wine, clean linen, non-military literature, noted. Day 3. Praetorians report no sound, no movement. General exits tent at dawn, visibly fatigued but calm, hostage status unchanged. The normal procedures for a political captive were brutal and loud: minimal rations, constant surveillance and isolation designed to break the will. This setup was not isolation. It was protection, possibly even comfort. Valerius was treating his most important political prisoner, the ultimate trophy of Rome's victory, not like a captive, but like a valued hidden guest. Gnaeus gripped the stylus so hard his knuckles turned white. The general was bending the rules of the empire, potentially committing treason by compromising a state asset. If the Senate learned of this, Valerius's career, and likely his life, would be forfeit. Gnaeus knew of the secrecy, but he didn't yet understand the emotional depth of the general's motivation, only the absolute danger of the contradiction. The entire camp was blind to it, accepting the general's word as law, but the ink on Gnaeus's parchment screamed the truth. De onde você está assistindo hoje? The crossing of their paths was less a physical collision and more a careful orchestration of chance and duty. Gnaeus had official paperwork requiring the general's signature for the requisition of new winter cloaks, an administrative necessity that could not be delegated. He was forced to approach the general's central pavilion at the time of the late morning briefing, the hour when Valerius usually conducted his most sensitive meetings. Gnaeus approached the tent with his parchment rolled tight, his movements tentative. The 2 massive Praetorians, the same men noted in his log, stood like bronze statues. Their presence radiated lethal efficiency and an unspoken warning. Gnaeus swallowed hard, presenting his forms. The Praetorian nearest the flap, a scarred veteran named Cassius, glanced at the documentation. "Wait here. Scriba. The general is occupied." Gnaeus waited, his ears straining. He heard the muffled tones of Valerius's voice, sharp and commanding, discussing battle strategies with his prefect Lucius. But beneath the metallic ring of Roman Latin, Gnaeus heard a faint sound that froze the ink in his veins. A different language, melodic and low, a cadence he recognized as Dacian. It was Vistula, and she was not pleading, she was responding. A sudden silence fell inside. Gnaeus risked a quick side glance. The tent flap was slightly ajar, disturbed by a momentary gust of wind. In that sliver of space, Gnaeus caught an impossible tableau. Valerius was seated, not in his commander's chair, but on a simple stool, his armor partially removed. Vistula was across from him, also seated, her hands free, tracing a pattern on a map spread between them. It was a map of the Dacian terrain, the land Rome had just seized. She was not being interrogated. She was advising. The general gestured with a silver stylus pointing to a mountain pass. Vistula's head shook slightly, and she spoke again in her native tongue, her voice firm, carrying authority. Valerius listened, his powerful shoulders slightly slouched, not in defeat but in concentration. He did not look at her as a captive. He looked at her as a source, perhaps even an equal. The sight destabilized Gnaeus. The empire's general, the hammer of Rome, taking strategic advice from the daughter of the conquered chieftain? This was beyond treason. It was an abandonment of the Roman order. Vistula was supposed to be weeping, chained, and terrified. Instead, she was engaging the man who had destroyed her people, seemingly without fear. Just then, Lucius, the ambitious prefect, exited the tent, his face rigid with calculated subservience. He saw Gnaeus waiting, and his gaze sharpened. Lucius did not know what Gnaeus had seen, but he recognized the fear in the clerk's eyes. "The general will sign your paltry papers later, Scriba," Lucius hissed, his voice laced with suspicion. "You waste his time with these formalities." Lucius's impatience pushed Gnaeus away, but the image of the general and the captive remained burned into his mind. Valerius was playing a dangerous game, one that involved not just a political prisoner, but the very secrets of Rome's expansion. Gnaeus walked away, the parchment heavy in his hands, realizing that the general's emotional vulnerability was now a state security risk, and he, the humble clerk, was the only one who had glimpsed the true nature of the secret partnership. Something was about to break, and the pressure building inside that tent would eventually shatter the entire legion's discipline. The oddity that cemented Gnaeus's fears was not found in the large official ledgers, but in the minute, often overlooked logistical details that crossed his desk. 2 days after witnessing the exchange inside the general's tent, Gnaeus was reviewing the quartermaster's requests for provisions. The entire legion operated on specific, bulked-out military supply lines: hardtack, cheap wine, coarse wool. Every item for the general's mess was accounted for separately, reflecting his status, but usually still within the limits of military availability. The latest request, however, was peculiar. It was a standing order, approved daily by Valerius himself, for a type of bread called panis dulcis, a fine, sweetened loaf made with honey and imported olives. It was a delicacy, far removed from the legion's grim standard fare. More critically, the order specified the bread must be freshly baked and delivered without fail. This was an expensive, complicated request in a frontier camp, easily justifying the general's rank, except for one crucial detail. Gnaeus remembered Valerius's own mess routine. The general adhered strictly to the ancient Roman discipline. His meal was always simple, sometimes just wine and dried fruit. Valerius would never consume panis dulcis. Gnaeus, through months of logging, knew the general's palate better than anyone. The immediate thought was corruption. Perhaps Valerius was entertaining a senatorial envoy secretly, but Gnaeus dismissed it. Valerius was too disciplined for petty theft of supplies, and a senator would require dozens of other expensive imports. Then the memory of the Dacian woman Vistula came back. Gnaeus quickly scanned the list of Dacian prisoners taken. Their diet, recorded elsewhere, was meager, designed for basic survival. If this expensive bread was not for the general, nor for a guest, it could only be for Vistula. Why would the conqueror provide luxury rations to the symbol of his victory? It was incoherence personified. It wasn't simple leniency. It was care. Valerius was protecting and nurturing the captive. If discovered, this behavior would be leveraged by his enemies in Rome as evidence of dangerous emotional compromise, perhaps even collusion. The laws regarding the treatment of high-value prisoners were absolute. They were assets, not humans requiring comfort. Gnaeus felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He was insignificant, yet he held the ledger that showed the general's secret deviation from duty. He knew he should destroy the evidence, tear out the page, classify the order as a clerical error, and bury the truth to protect the powerful man who, despite his brutality on the battlefield, commanded respect. But what if this strange protection of Vistula was dangerous for the empire? What if she was using this favor to extract information, or worse, planning an act of sabotage? Gnaeus doubted the fragile foreign woman could harm the entire legion, but the potential for Valerius to be compromised terrified him. The thought of reporting the anomaly to Lucius, the ambitious prefect, was equally terrifying. Lucius would use it not for the Empire's security, but for his own promotion. Gnaeus decided in that moment of dread to hold the information tight. He had to observe more closely. The risk was no longer just a misplaced parchment. The risk was a choice between silence and the potential collapse of the general's command, a collapse that could drag the entire frontier into chaos. The precarious balance of Gnaeus's anxiety snapped the following evening. He overheard a conversation in the armory that was not meant for a clerk's ears. Lucius, the prefect, was speaking to a tribune named Junius, his voice oily with conspiracy. "The general is softening, Junius. Too many late nights in that tent. Too much concern for a chattel that belongs to the state. The Senate will hear of his melancholy, but I intend to deliver the evidence myself. Clean, irrefutable." Junius, more pragmatic, asked, "Evidence of what, prefect? Taking a few extra rations?" "No, idiot," Lucius spat. "Evidence of a personal attachment. Tonight I will move Vistula to the holding cells, citing a security risk from Dacian loyalists. We will see how calmly the general handles his loss. We will see if he obstructs a direct order." Lucius's plan was clear. Force Valerius to choose between his strange, forbidden protection and his duty. If Valerius resisted, Lucius would have grounds for immediate deposition. Gnaeus felt the camp floor shift beneath him. Lucius's action was a death sentence for Valerius, and likely for Vistula too, who would be subjected to harsh interrogation immediately upon removal from Valerius's protection. Gnaeus's initial fear of disorder was instantly replaced by a deep moral certainty. Valerius, despite his strange secret, was protecting this woman for a reason that resonated beyond strategy, a reason connected to the humanity Gnaeus had glimpsed. He had to warn him. But Gnaeus could not approach the general directly. He was too small, too easily dismissed, and Lucius had eyes everywhere. Instead, Gnaeus turned to his only tools, ink and paper. He rushed back to his tent, heart hammering against his ribs, adrenaline overriding his fatigue. He grabbed a fresh roll of parchment, dipped his stylus and began to write, not a formal letter, but a sequence of administrative notes, the language he knew Valerius was trained to see through. He forged a supply requisition, standardizing the text to appear routine. But in the marginalia, usually reserved for notes on quantity and quality, Gnaeus wrote quickly, using a coded military abbreviation for emergency alert, followed by 3 precise details. P. Lucius, prefect, mobilizing. Target Vistula, 4th watch. Reason, personal compromise of general's authority. He sealed the small scroll with the official stamp for immediate internal delivery, masking its urgency under the guise of corrected inventory errors. He knew the general meticulously reviewed even the smallest administrative corrections. Gnaeus located the centurion in charge of delivering the daily paperwork to the general's tent. He handed over the scroll, his hand trembling. "A crucial correction on the grain count, centurion. Must reach the general before the 4th hour." The centurion accepted the scroll without question, used to the scriba's meticulous fussiness. As the centurion walked away toward the command center, Gnaeus felt exposed, standing in the harsh, cold light of the camp. He had just inserted himself directly into the most dangerous political power struggle on the Roman frontier. His act of courage was quiet, administrative, and utterly traceable. If Lucius discovered the warning before Valerius read it, Gnaeus would lose his life slowly and painfully. The fate of the general and the captive now hinged on a single, coded note hidden among numbers. The story had pivoted violently, moving from quiet fear to overt crisis. General Valerius sat at his campaign desk, the lantern casting harsh shadows across his weary face. He was reviewing the tactical maps, mentally planning the next stage of consolidation, an exhausting task that required relentless focus. He was preparing to retire for the night when his attendant delivered the final stack of paperwork. Most were mundane, casualty lists, weapon maintenance reports. Buried beneath the rest was the small, tightly rolled scroll stamped "Corrected Inventory Errors." Valerius frowned at the title. Gnaeus, the head scriba, was usually impeccable. He unrolled the document, his eyes scanning the numbers. The count of Gallic wheat was indeed one measure off. It was irritatingly minor. Then his gaze snagged on the familiar, precise handwriting in the margin, next to the quantity column. It was Gnaeus's, but the content was cold fire. P. Lucius, prefect, mobilizing. Target, Vistula, 4th watch. Reason, personal compromise of general's authority. Chiamamus to emergency alert. The air left Valerius's lungs in a silent rush. He didn't question the warning. The methodical delivery and the detailed accusation confirmed what he had suspected. Lucius was not a patient man. The prefect had observed the general's unusual protection of Vistula, correctly deduced the emotional breach of discipline, and was moving to exploit it. Valerius crumpled the parchment instantly, tossing it into the brazier where it turned to ash in seconds. His mind raced, calculating the timeline. The 4th watch began in less than an hour. Lucius would use the formal protocol of a security transfer, backed by enough men to make resistance treasonous. Valerius could not openly fight Lucius without confirming the charge of compromise and initiating a disastrous civil conflict within the legion. His priority shifted instantly from strategy to survival. Vistula's survival. The moment she left his protection, she would be officially processed as chattel of the state, removed from the immediate, unyielding legal protection afforded by a Roman general's direct custody. Lucius would have her interrogated, not for tactical information, but for proof of Valerius's alleged impropriety. Valerius knew the interrogators would twist any kindness she had received into evidence of a forbidden relationship, condemning them both. Valerius rose, his movements swift and silent, the weight of his command settling back onto his shoulders. He didn't summon the regular guards. He summoned the 2 dedicated praetorians who stood outside his tent, Cassius and his partner, Titus, the one who had worried about the locked door. Cassius, Valerius commanded, his voice a low gravel. Prepare the horses. 3. Ready for immediate silent departure. Use the secondary track leading to the southern ridge. Move the packs now. Do not speak of this. Cassius, whose loyalty was absolute and personal, simply nodded, his face unreadable. He had seen enough wars to recognize the look of a man making a desperate break. Valerius strode to the interior flap of the tent. He had kept Vistula safe, delaying her fate by days, believing he could somehow arrange for her quiet return home or negotiate a separate peace. That hope was dead now. Lucius's move had forced the choice: lose her to the machinery of the state, or lose everything to save her life. He chose the latter, knowing that abandonment of post, especially with a political prisoner, meant immediate designation as an enemy of Rome. His legacy, his rank, his life, all were now worthless. The emergency mode was engaged, and the long controlled life of General Marcus Valerius was crashing into absolute ruin. He needed to get Vistula out of the camp before Lucius's patrol even started marching. Valerius pulled back the dividing curtain, revealing Vistula. She was standing by the small brazier, not asleep, her eyes focused and watchful. She wore a simple, clean tunic, a gift from the general, her only concession to her captivity. She had been waiting for something, though perhaps not this sudden urgency. "We leave now," Valerius stated, his Latin clipped and immediate. "Lucius moves to take you in the 4th watch. You will not survive his interrogation." Vistula didn't flinch. She spoke in her own language, a sound Valerius had grown accustomed to. He had learned enough phrases during their private map sessions to understand the heart of her question. "Why?" Valerius looked away for a moment, the facade of the ruthless general finally cracking. "Rome demands retribution. You are the symbol of your people's defeat. I delayed it, but I cannot stop it. If I hand you over, you face slow destruction. If I defy Rome for you, I face my own destruction. I choose defiance." He finally looked at her, his military bearing replaced by the raw expression of a father. "Vistula, I took you because I saw my daughter Livia in you. 20 years ago, she was taken by barbarians. I did nothing. I continued the campaign. My duty was absolute. I left her to whatever fate awaited her. I broke the oath of a father for the oath of a general." The confession hung heavy, a truth deeper than any political conspiracy. Vistula stepped closer, her fierce defiance softening with comprehension. She was not merely a political pawn to him. She was a debt, a penance for a past failure. "You brought me the sweetbread," she stated, speaking Latin slowly, deliberately. She had learned more than strategy from him. "You showed me the map of the forests where your daughter was lost. You never asked me for information about my people, only about the land, the forests, the terrain of the spirit." "I only wanted to protect what I could not protect before," Valerius admitted, the weight of the empire briefly lifting from his shoulders. "I can't change Livia's fate, but I can change yours." A violent knock rattled the outer door. It was Lucius, too early, too bold. "General, open this door. We have detected armed movement nearby. We must secure the hostage immediately." Valerius grabbed his sword, the weapon feeling alien in his hand. It was meant for the enemy, not his own legion. "Too late for polite procedure, Prefect," he murmured. He turned to Vistula, the urgency absolute. "There is a tunnel beneath the supply barrels. Cassius will guide you to the horses. Go, Vistula, ride toward the Black Forest. Find your remaining people. Tell them Rome offered you a choice. Tell them the general broke his oath to save you." Before she could move, the heavy plank door splintered inward under the pressure of a battering ram. Lucius burst in, followed by 4 armed centurions, their torches flaring. Lucius pointed a trembling finger at Vistula, free and unguarded. "Treason! General, you have compromised the state." Valerius stepped forward, shielding Vistula completely, his massive figure filling the frame. "You accuse me, Prefect. You violated protocol and broke into my command post without warrant," he roared, the sound echoing the authority of 100 battles. But the distraction was brief. Vistula, utilizing the chaos, slipped past the destroyed door and into the hands of the waiting Praetorians. Lucius saw the general's empty space and realized the woman was gone, replaced only by Valerius's furious glare. The battle was lost for Lucius, but the war for Valerius had just begun. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. Lucius, denied the hostage, could not physically prove the general's romantic entanglement, but Valerius's defiance, his physical obstruction of the arrest and the subsequent disappearance of Vistula, was undeniable abandonment of duty. Before dawn, Lucius, acting quickly, used the political momentum and the support of ambitious junior officers to issue a formal charge of high treason. Valerius did not resist. He stood on the raised platform used for morning assembly, his armor polished but his face stripped bare of pretense. He allowed the legionary officers to strip him of his military insignia, the oak crown, the rings of command, the scarlet cloak. His fall was swift, public and absolute. The man who had commanded 10,000 soldiers was reduced to a civilian prisoner guarded by the very men he had trained. Gnaeus watched from the periphery, his face pale, realizing the scale of the destruction his coded note had unleashed. He had saved Vistula, but cost the general everything. Lucius, newly elevated to interim command, was furious, demanding to know how Valerius had been warned. The centurion who delivered the scroll was interrogated, but he only remembered the fussy clerk and the inventory correction. Gnaeus remained silent, blending back into the anonymity of the record keepers, a ghost watching the ruins. The true consequence, however, was psychological. The 16th Legion, built on the solid rock of Valerius's discipline, felt the shockwave of his betrayal. The soldiers, trained to view their general as an infallible extension of Rome, were suddenly leaderless, confused, and prone to mutiny. Lucius tried to assert authority, but his self-serving ambition was transparent. The cohesion was gone. The enemy across the Danube, sensing the sudden power vacuum and the discord, began mobilizing in force, no longer deterred by the reputation of the Via Triumphalis. Valerius was imprisoned in a small, damp storage room, awaiting transfer back to Rome for trial, a certain execution. He had lost his command, his honor, and his life, trading them all for a chance at redemption for Livia's ghost. He sat alone, accepting the darkness. He knew the Empire would hunt Vistula relentlessly, but he had bought her crucial time and distance. The severest blow was the reaction of his loyal Praetorian, Cassius. Cassius returned to the camp alone, having ensured Vistula was far into the difficult mountain passes. riding toward freedom. He reported the general's actions, but not before delivering a final, private word to Valerius in the stockade. "We followed the oath to you, General," Cassius stated, his voice flat with despair. "We helped the enemy escape. We are now also betrayers, but we do not regret the loyalty." Valerius looked at his loyal soldier, a man who had sacrificed his entire career and his future for a single humanitarian order. "Go, Cassius, disappear. Take the money I left for you. Do not let Rome claim your loyalty as treason." Cassius refused. He turned himself in, accepting the same charges as Valerius. The price of Valerius's truth was not only his own downfall, but the ruin of the few honest men who had followed him. No one was untouched by the moral storm he had created. Justice, in Rome's view, was coming for them all. The trial never reached its conclusion in Rome. The Dacian tribes, emboldened by the chaos in the 16th Legion following Valerius's removal, launched a swift and devastating counterattack. Lucius, overwhelmed and strategically incompetent, failed to anticipate the assault Vistula's knowledge of the terrain had likely facilitated. The legion suffered a catastrophic defeat, throwing the entire Danube frontier into jeopardy. Rome desperately needed a commander who understood the terrain and commanded respect. Valerius was pulled from the stockade, not to face execution, but to receive a terrible, temporary pardon. The Senate's decree was cruel. He was restored to general status with a single, brutal mission: restore order and secure the frontier. But he was branded infamis, a man stripped of honor, required to achieve victory to avoid immediate execution upon his return. He was given a second chance, but only on the condition of fighting a losing war. Valerius accepted. He had nothing left to lose but the chance to mitigate the suffering of the soldiers he had inadvertently endangered. He found Gnaeus, the humble clerk, still organizing the paperwork amid the disaster. Valerius, now a general with no political future, recognized the clerk's quiet bravery. "The coded note, Gnaeus. It saved her life. It cost me everything else." Gnaeus looked at the massive man, now wearing the general's cloak again, but with the shadow of death hanging over him. "It saved her humanity, General. That is more than any inventory correction could achieve." Valerius did not ask Gnaeus to fight. He asked him to manage the supply lines for the wounded, to ensure that the least important men received the best care, a task Gnaeus undertook with quiet fervor. Months later, Valerius achieved the impossible. He did not secure a grand victory, but he orchestrated a strategic, tactical withdrawal that saved the remnants of the legion from total annihilation. His final report, written not from arrogance but from weary honesty, detailed the enemy's strength and advised a negotiated peace, a concept abhorrent to Rome. Valerius knew his duty was done. He had protected his soldiers and completed his self-imposed penance. He walked into the Senate chambers in Rome, not to accept a triumph, but to face the executioner. He stood tall, a man who had finally reconciled duty and conscience. He was not celebrated, but neither was he begging. He was Marcus Valerius, the general who chose humanity over empire. But the execution never came. Due to the disastrous losses caused by Lucius's command and Valerius's final, truthful report detailing the unsustainable cost of the war, the Senate, though refusing to pardon him, did not dare create a martyr. Valerius was exiled, his wealth confiscated, forbidden to ever set foot in Rome again. Exiled to the farthest reaches of southern Gaul, Valerius became a simple farmer. He lived in silence, tending the soil, the scars of his life internal. He never spoke of his campaigns. One spring morning, a traveler arrived, a small, sturdy man with ink-stained fingers and intelligent eyes. It was Gnaeus. He had secured a position nearby, administering a small provincial tax district. He never intruded on Valerius's solitude, but he was always close, a silent proof that the truth, no matter how costly, had forged an unexpected and enduring bond. Valerius looked at the new life Gnaeus had found, and for the first time, the grief over Livia eased, replaced by the profound, simple hope of having restored dignity to at least one Dacian daughter. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more emotional and epic tales like this one.